Like, that's my takeaway.
Oh, wow. That's because you're in...
It's the story of someone killing their friend.
Oh. That's what patriarchy would have you say.
I would not. No, yeah, I'm not going on the internet saying it was all her fault about my girl. Let me be very clear about that.
Welcome to Cult Favorite, the podcast that never asks you to sign a billion-year contract. Because that's a long time, y'all. I'm Miranda Simmons.
And I'm Mike Altman. Well, this is some sort of job security, I guess. Depending.
But they don't get paid enough.
Well, no, not that billion. I can imagine a billion-year contract.
I see. Okay. Yeah. Just not that one.
Although we were off air having a conversation about I can't choose my career. So maybe I would get itchy after like $500 million. And I'm Mike Altman. We are two religious studies professors trying to understand all of these cult documentaries that you can't stop binge watching.
The fact that these conversations are part of our career means that we have the best job in the world. That is my opinion.
This is true. As I always tell myself, I get to do this.
Yes, you do. Support the show. Tell them how, Mike.
You can follow us on all of the socials at Cult Favorite Pod, and be sure to subscribe to the show. Leave us a rating and a review in Apple or on Spotify. Just tell people about the show. There's a share button. You can use that. You can run into people in real life and steal their phones and subscribe. Always
with the stealing. Today,
speaking of stealing,
it is Scientology Day.
Speaking of surreptitiously misdeeds,
we watched Going Clear, Scientology and the Prison of Belief, which came out in when? What was the year?
2015.
And I feel like it was kind of one of the not original, but definitely one that like helped put this cult documentary genre like really in the mainstream map.
Yeah, I would say it's like this one, Wild Wild Country, which we did a couple episodes ago, and this one are some of the two sort of like pillars of the genre, early genre.
Because the person, you know a little bit more about the director or the person who made it.
I read his Wikipedia page.
Okay.
When in doubt.
Well, he made a few important things.
Yeah.
Things that got a lot of traction anyway.
He made the one about Theranos. Which I think we actually could theoretically maybe watch.
Oh, 10,000%.
And then he made one about Enron. He made one about, I think he made one about, I was looking for the list here. Oh, he made one about the Catholic sex abuse scandal called Mea Maxima Culpa, Silence in the House of God.
And WikiLeaks too, I think.
No, did he?
I think so.
Okay.
He's really interested, though, in like he makes projects about these large organizations that have complicated backstories, whose effects in the world are a little complicated, dubious.
Yeah. He's got one coming out soon.
Straight up abusive sometimes.
About The Sopranos. And
so
so he's been doing a lot of like music stuff.
Man,
Alex Gibney has, but definitely the one on there's a Steve Jobs one. But the one on the Catholic Church and the one on Theranos, I think are right up our alley.
You said theoretically, but like
no, we should do them for sure.
As an unapologetic theorist, I think we could do a season of The Sopranos.
Yeah.
Just saying.
We could. I'm looking at the list now, and he has one on Three Doors Down, which I'm very interested to know why. So
I'm not.
I think it's
but that's
so. They actually came to Birmingham recently, and I was trying to convince. I was like trying to convince
you
my
thought
partner
about it for a minute
that we should go, and she was like, "No way!" And then I started playing all of the. It was Three Doors Down, and like, was it Hoobastank? I don't know. It was it was like Incubus.
Buddy.
I think it was Incubus.
Buddy.
It was very much like if you whatever, like 96 Rock in Atlanta in like 1999.
Part of the reason that I enjoy our conversations so much, coming together once a week to talk is because of how much I learn about our divergent pop culture consumption. What did you know? Speaking of pop culture consumption, like what did you know about Scientology before this?
I knew about Hubbard. I knew the basics of Scientology from like classes in college and American religion stuff that J. Gordon Melton, the sort of like encyclopedic expert on New Age movements, I knew some of his stuff. I wanted to watch Battlefield Earth for years, but never have, just as like a thing. I knew about Tom Cruise, knew about John Travolta. And actually, I realized I watched this when it first came out in 2015, like one evening. But all that kind of stuck with me was like, wow, that's jacked up. So it was nice to go back to it from this angle.
It's a long documentary. It's over 2 hours.
Yeah,
but
yeah, it was. It's definitely long.
Well,
what did you know?
Yeah, Hollywood. Like, I did not take classes on new religious movements because all of my degrees are in English. And so I knew that Scientology was a thing that exists. I knew that Tom Cruise and John Travolta had varying degrees of things to say about their own involvement therein. But that was kind of it. My exposure was what I think a lot of people's exposure is by way of celebrity culture. You know?
Yeah.
And every now and again, Tom Cruise would like pop up on some news show to talk about why Scientology is great.
Yeah. I feel like I've seen like the clips that are in the documentary of that really weird, like black turtleneck Tom Cruise interview.
Dude.
I feel like I saw that before, but I don't.
Now, I mean, if time were a renewable resource, I would like want to go back and watch that interview because I'm interested in how those kinds of clips are edited.
Yeah.
Because the ones that we get in the documentary are, they really do make him look like a person who is not like in total control of his faculties. And so I wonder if that was
was this Tom Cruise the jumping on the couch at Oprah era of Tom Cruise? I was trying to do it by haircuts.
Know.
That's how I follow Tom Cruise.
Yeah. It might have been. I don't know.
I think I was wondering. Yeah.
It might have been. I mean, I know that he's an enthusiastic liver of his own life. I know that he cares a lot about the things that he's into.
I wonder if maniacal, like there's the part of me that's always like, is maniacal Tom Cruise just a work? Like,
a happy dude though also. I don't know.
Was it just like the gimmick for that era? Because you have to, the way you survive, right, is you constantly reinvent yourself. So for a while you're just,
Anyway, so that, but time is not a renewable resource, and so I don't want to go back and watch that interview again. But I am interested in some of the edits and the clips and the ways that this documentary was put together because it was really polished. I think it was really well done.
Yes,
but it also it had a lot of its own creative license with music or dramatization or the way that it would take clips and interpose the clips with the things that somebody was saying about the clips. And
So if for people who didn't watch it, because for them time is a renewable
over
resource.
2 hours, here's your 5 minutes. I'm gonna try. And in our notes that we share, Mike conveniently put these into 3 acts, which I think is right because there's like the first half hour or so we get backstory on L. Ron Hubbard, who is the founder of the Church of Scientology. And then it goes into a piece about David Miscavige, who steps up into the leadership role after L. Ron Hubbard dies, the celebrity culture that begins to take hold inside of the church. And then it moves into the church's critics, those who left, those who defected, and the church's response to those people. So, Act 1, L. Ron Hubbard, born in 1911. He got to start writing pulp science fiction in magazines, and he served in the war. The fun trivia fact was that he has the Guinness Book of World Records He's the record holder for most books published. I don't know if that remains the case, but it was the case when they did the documentary. He had like over 1,000 books.
It's like if he had been alive during like the self-publishing Kindle era, just think what would have happened.
Mm-hmm. Well, so he served in the war. He made up, his heroic exploits after he was discharged. That's a fun. There are like so many little rabbit holes that you can follow. We'll, drop a few along the way, but that's one of them. He had long been interested in the question of just what exactly is man. He joined a group of seekers in Los Angeles in 1945 after he was discharged. And that's another really interesting rabbit hole right there that wherein appears British occultist Aleister Crowley, the super fascinating Marjorie Cameron. I think that she's, go search, dear listeners. She had agreed to being impregnated with the Antichrist, but Hubbard meets the woman there that he would later marry, whose name is Sarah Northrop. And we hear from her stories of like long-term physical and emotional abuse that she suffered at his hands. But during this time, it's like 1950 or so, he starts writing the book that would become Dianetics, The Modern Science of Mental Health. It was actually published in 1950. So he had started like forming these ideas earlier, but Dianetics, that book, becomes the basis for Scientology. His then wife, Sarah, would say that he wanted to form a religion, even there at the beginning, because it was a way to make a lot of money and do so tax-free. But this was the gist of Dianetics. All of our mental and physical problems result from memories, what he called engrams. And thetans or spirits kind of invade your body at birth, and those are to blame for like putting all of these memories. And you can have memories like inside of you. You can have memories from past lives. There are like no limit to how many thetans and can come and be part of your subconscious. So those memories, those past traumas specifically, are where and why we get problems mentally and physically. And so we need to remove those. And we do so through sessions with an auditor. Those sessions ultimately allow people to reach the status of what he called clear, which is why we get the title of the documentary, because you dissolve traumas by repeatedly observing and narrating them. And so in so doing, you're also healing your body. So you're healing. It's a process of like healing your brain and body, but which, could sound like therapy. But it's broadly panned by the scientific and medical community. Hubbard would distance himself from them as well. There's an interesting, clip of him talking in an interview about what their interests are versus his. He thinks that they're invested in keeping people sick, etc. But even though it was panned by that community, it was super popular with the public, and kept on the bestseller list for a long, long time. He was able to start selling a Dianetics course for $500. This is in 1951, and that's about $6,000 today. So he had a monetary priority and vision for what he had a monetary vision in the same way that he had a spiritual vision, or whatever.
Yeah.
So man is a spiritual being. We struggle to live with the bodies that we are forced to deal with. The creation story is its own rabbit hole that involves 75 million years and volcanoes and hydrogen bombs and a galactic overlord named Zeno. But that is a story that you are given only after you attain a certain level toward clarity on what they call the bridge. He was being investigated by the IRS for tax evasion. He went into hiding for the final years of his life to avoid that. He had tried to get tax-free status in 1967, but he was denied. So, which is going to become important later. So that book is really the the basis for the Church of Scientology because the book itself kind of fell out of vogue. But then he repackaged it as this platform for Scientology. And then that was something that he could carry forward and recruit people with. Okay. Act 2.
Act 2.
We ready?
Yeah.
We get David Miscavige coming and becoming the leader of the group. There is this really sharp divide of how we get introduced to followers of Scientology and parishioners, because on one hand, you've got who are called the Sea Org, the group called the Sea Org, who are these really devoted practitioners who like actually went aboard boats and signed a billion-year contract to work for Hubbard and spread his teachings. They get paid pennies. They're subjected to all of this grueling work. We hear about them, but then on the other hand, we hear about the celebrities that the church is really invested in pleasing, like in any way possible. Post 60s, like the way that they talk about it was that the church gave people a way to get high without drugs. And so, it was in LA, Hollywood. People were looking for things. And so they had, they talked about the Grateful Dead. They mentioned Leonard Cohen, Rock Hudson. So several of these
Hallelujah is actually about Xenu.
Several people that we wouldn't like. We've come to know it because of John Travolta and Tom Cruise, but celebrity recruitment was part of the pitch from the beginning. David Miscavige becomes kind of BFF with Tom Cruise. He's the best man when he weds. He gets married to Nicole Kidman. I think Miscavige is their best man. But they're become, as he grows in power, so do the structural abuses. And so former members of the church talk about, for example, the hole at this place called at one of the centers called Gold Base. And there's also talk about a what is it called? The Rehabilitation Project Force.
Yes.
Is that right?
It all sounds
it's
like
RPF.
Yes. It all sounds like stuff made up at like in a tabletop space. Like everything's like the force, the crew, the org, it's very like,
we're gonna get there because I'm really interested in the uniforms.
Yeah, there's uniforms.
Of the leaders, yeah.
Oh yeah. No, there's not enough about like the aesthetics of. I know I'm on an aesthetics kick lately, but the aesthetics of Scientology are fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Like every convention looks like it's a giant cheesecake factory.
Cheesecake Factory.
It looks like a cheesecake factory.
I don't.
Have you have you ever eaten at Cheesecake Factory?
I mean,
the restaurant.
Maybe
the greatest restaurant in America.
I also, didn't know anything about like boiled peanut shells. So explain to me.
So Cheesecake Factory has it's the greatest restaurant in the world in that it is this Art Deco monstrosity inside and out with a menu the size of a copy of Dianetics that has like there's
anything you could ever possibly
there's no logic to it. Yeah. It is excess in a kind of French philosophical level.
I'm into it because then like cheesecake is like your empty ideological container into which you can hold any manner of food.
Yeah, but
I like that. I get the appeal.
Yeah, but then the menu is just like, would you like, like Korean dumplings and spaghetti?
Right.
Go for it.
At the same time.
Yes.
Maybe.
No, for the table. But that's what these conventions look like. They look like the inside of it. Never mind.
Okay. Okay. So the hole was like a place where people who were pretty far up in the church would go and experience just lots of physical and mental abuse. The RPF was a place where if you were found to like question something about the church, you were put there to be kind of like re-indoctrinated and kind of get your mind right, So we started hearing about the followers, the abuses, and then because of those abuses, and we'll hear from lots of different former church members about which one of those, which combination of those ultimately saw them leaving. You don't get, I mean, I'm sure that there are plenty, but like the people that we actually hear from are people who are in the church for over a decade, some of them 20 and 30 years. Like you don't get a lot of insight from people who like went, hung out for like maybe a year or two and then took off. So
or stayed for 20 years, but were just doing their thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we hear from some former members who were really high level people in the church, especially Mike Rinder. He has a podcast now with Leah
Remini.
There it is.
Yeah.
Remini?
I
don't know. Mike Rinder was their spokesperson, the church's spokesperson from like 1982 to 2007. So he's in there for a long, long time. We also hear from Marty Rathbun. He was a top lieutenant. The people that we hear from are top people in the church. When they finally leave, they talk about this policy, a pretty formal one that the church has called fair game. And that's their policy of like how they go about attacking critics. So we get the fallout of people who identify the abuse, finally make the move to leave the church, but then what the consequences of that become. So what stuck out to you? What do you want to talk about?
Oh, so many things. A couple of things. I guess so. The first thing that jumped out to me is the kind of the mythology or the myths of Scientology in terms of like the story of Xenu that we kind of went over. But also like kind of the early, when the first part on L. Ron Hubbard and his sort of thought and what they're describing, I'm like making a laundry list of like, okay, you've got like a bunch of Freud and sort of subconscious stuff. You've got this kind of tapping into the idea of sort of the longstanding kind of Gnostic tradition, which is basically Gnostic meaning like knowledge, this idea of like there's secret knowledge that only some people can figure out, right? There's a lot of like the whole spiritual evolution thing is like a longstanding trope from like the 19th century forward with groups like, I think we've mentioned Theosophy before. Like, folks at home, go to Wikipedia and look up Helena Blavatsky, and you'll hear this, there's this interesting kind of like parallel to this person who has this kind of mysterious past and this kind of interesting mythology they bring with them. And Blavatsky also kind of invented a lot of stuff. She wrote a whole book that was based on a text she supposedly found called the Book of Daisen that was written in, I can't remember what it was, some sort of Persian that didn't really exist.
Is it worth like nutshelling in 20 seconds Theosophy?
Well, I mean, the Theosophy thing is the idea of like this spiritual evolution that you're going to reach. There's sort of a great chain of spiritual being, and through various practices you can, and actually through gaining this Gnostic secret knowledge, you can reach new heights of spiritual evolution. Also talking a lot about science and how science is like not right, but we're doing the real science kind of thing. Space religions, whether it's like the Nation of Islam or whether it's, we already talked about Heaven's Gate, like, so there's like all this stuff that he's like pulling from this stuff that's in the air, that if you are a seeker in the 50s is kind of floating there. But then I think too, when he talks about like, I want to make money with this, like, okay, so 1950s is this, you have this suburbanization that's happening where so many people, especially like, so the GI Bill after World War II means that all these people who grew up maybe in a Catholic or Jewish enclave in the city is now going to college, and then they're leaving and they're settling down in suburbs. I mean, it's happening to Protestants too, but you have this kind of broad suburbanization, and then new ideas about like health and wellness, and so like, and then these new with the kind of overall economic rise of the period, this like new expendable income. So you have people who like know about religion, but are more educated than their parents about it, and are not connected to the old kind of enclaves they were a part of, whatever that might be, who have money to spend and are now enduring the new stresses of like suburban office work life post-war. And like, so just pulling off this laundry list of like new age, not even new age yet, but this laundry list of like metaphysical, for lack of better, ideas, and then packaging them up and handing them to people and saying, let me help you. Like, brilliant. Like,
and it's going to remain the case that people pay for like access to higher and higher levels along the bridge toward going clear. Yeah.
So I mean, the that kind of combination, and so it was interesting that sort of all of those roots that I saw, but then on top of that, like it got me thinking, like, what's the line between a myth in terms of like a very important story that functions to hold a community together, and a conspiracy theory and a sort of in science fiction.
Yeah.
It really kind of like there's like a spectrum there that I thought was really, that it kind of raised for me, that I thought was really interesting. Because there are people who saw so Battlefield Earth is vaguely the myth of Scientology made into a really bad sci-fi movie. But a lot of people...
When was it made?
90s?
Okay.
Alex is on it. Really? Okay. 2000. Yeah. So, and it was like... Yeah, Travolta, I think, funded a lot of it too.
Oh, interesting. Was he in it?
He stars in it, yeah.
Ah.
I don't know. I've never seen it. Again,
we should have a movie night.
We should. Cold favorite goes to the movies. Put that down in the idea.
Well, like remember the part of one part of the creation myth is that like, but I'm not gonna be able to explain it right. But like humans are forced to sit in a movie theater to watch
a 3D thing.
Something.
Yeah,
anyway.
It's wild. It's very like the Matrix kind of vibe.
So you're bringing up a really good point. So difference between myth, conspiracy theory, and science fiction is very much on the table. And also too, I mean, just the very definition of religion itself is on the table from jump because of wanting that tax-free status.
Yeah.
So that becomes an integral piece of how the Church of Scientology tries to not only understand itself, but also make a case to government agencies about themselves.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And so the other thing that's more like kind of because Gibney, or actually not Gibney, it's Lawrence Wright. So Lawrence Wright has a book with the same title that then Gibney was like, we should make a movie about this, and they work together, and Wright ends up being a part of one of the producers. And basically the handful of sort of deep former Scientologists that Gibney interviews were, I think, most of Wright's sources for his book. And but what I think is interesting, because Wright says that like at the beginning, like I wanted to figure out why people would believe this, but we do not get any of that kind of like explanation of like, there's no theory presented about like why someone would become a Scientologist. I think that might have been the motivation initially, but then you get all the details about like the abuses, et cetera, and so suddenly that takes the forefront. But I was kind of left with that kind of question, right? And I think there are two things: one that I wrote down here, and then one that came to me when we were talking. Like I think confessing. So auditing is basically it's a form of both therapy and confession, because you're supposed to be, they're constantly pushing you to expand on these memories and these ideas. And a lot of it is not great stuff, right? And a lot of it is about admitting things you've done wrong, with the idea being like, that wasn't you, that's Satan's, and to get clear. But of course, and one of the people says, like, I felt like I was just like this horrible person because you're just constantly talking about your flaws and the things that have happened to you and the things you've done wrong, which they then all like file away. But I do think, though, for a lot of people, the audit, and they all talk about this early on, the auditing process it feels good because there's something about confession that, and there's like if we want to get really fancy, like Michel Foucault has some stuff on this in the context of like early Christianity. But there's something about that confessional experience that I think people are drawn to. Especially if you think it's going to be a way of like expunging the past and expunging these faults. And like, it's a thing you have in a long history, especially in the West, but in other places. And so like, I think there's something about that, but there's a power dynamic to confession. And so when you have confession that feels good on one level, but then you also know is then leveraged as like um, like intelligence on you.
Yeah, because they keep those files
Yeah.
as a way to continue holding power
Right.
and using as intimidation if people ever start kind of getting out of line.
Yeah. And so like, a therapist or a Roman Catholic priest, they have very strict rules about how they handle these situations for good reason, but not an auditor.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's that piece of it that I think is attractive to people. And that's how you start, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you go, I remember walking down the street in Toronto one time at a conference, and there was, a bookstore, but wasn't really a bookstore because the only book they had on all the shelves was Dianetics. I'm like, oh, I know what that is.
Interesting. Yeah.
But they like want you to come in and do a free reading because you're
Mm-hmm.
going to get that, like, feels good. Like I feel better after that, right? But the other side too is like I think people like merit badges.
Mm-hmm.
Like people love, like if you like, and I know this because I have teenagers who play video games, and so many video games now have like daily challenges, weekly challenges, a season of challenges. And so the whole game, like you're playing the game, but you're also constantly trying to get these like merit badges. And there's something fun about like, and it's like, what do you get at the end? Nothing. Like you're getting nothing.
But it is regular external validation
exactly.
for the work that you're putting in.
Yes. So in some ways, like Scientology is built around the same concept that like Fortnite daily challenges keep people coming back and playing the game. And so I found like, so if we're, so it's kind of like there is a gap in the film of like, if there's roughly 25,000, maybe fewer Scientologists when I was doing the digging, like we've heard from 4 or 5 who are like really deep, but what are the other?
Yeah. Well, and the numbers vary so wildly depending on what source you're looking into. So that's interesting.
They claim there's like 4 million, which is like, that's like if there were as many Scientologists as Lutherans.
And then what maybe it was the film or maybe it was in my own little internet digging, but 40 to 50,000 was a number that I saw a lot or heard about. So yeah, or maybe it's under 25, who knows? But you do get to literally, and then also, for folks like internally, but you do get to, in a very tangible way, get to mark your progress. Like you do move up. We hear from one person, Sarah Goldberg, who like attained the highest level of spirituality, and she was a member for 27 years, and she didn't leave until they the formal term is like disconnected. They excommunicated her son because he was declared a suppressive for not giving them information about some negative press that was going to come out. But then they said to her that she needs to disconnect from her son, and that's what finally made her leave. But she was a member for 27 years, and she became a like OT8, which is it's an operating thetan is OT. So like you're always a spiritual being, but you're like ascending in these ranks to someone who like casts off all of your bodily trappings and become pure spirit.
We love a systematized ladder to climb. It's good to know what's expected of us.
Yeah, I get that.
What do you want to talk about though?
Yeah, I mean, so money was definitely a big part of the story that that stuck out to me. I guess because I know that tax shelters, tax havens, tax evasion, I know that there are billions of dollars wrapped up in that.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of hard for me to conceptualize because I'm a person with a stable income, but it's not anything that the IRS cares about.
Right.
And so it's hard for me to, it all feels like monopoly money. And so to think about how strategic the organization was specifically in relation to taxes and tax status was just enlightening to me. So like a decade into Miscavige's leadership, the church faced $1 billion tax bill, which just seemed wild to me.
Even more than like Wesley Snipes.
But they were worth at the time only like a quarter of this. And so his response was to like launch this really organized campaign of lawsuit filing against the IRS and against like individual staffers at the IRS. And so I guess just like the numbers were were something that I want to talk about, because it was like 2,400 lawsuits leveled at the same time against the IRS.
David Miscavige must be the worst person to have to wait upon at a restaurant.
You know what though? I bet he would love the Cheesecake Factory.
Because I bet I want someone.
More is better.
I think there must be a thing where he's like really, but like he must, because like so much of this is just like the IRS does not want the headache of dealing with this shit.
Yeah.
And so if we just overwhelm them, with lawsuits, well, they're just going to be like, fine, whatever.
And said like, we will take these lawsuits away if you give us the status you want, like that we want. And this was in the 80s. The IRS was under a microscope anyway and getting lots of flack. And so it was pretty good timing for them to wage war against the IRS, I guess. But then in 1993, there is this giant convention. I don't know what they call the gatherings, but
at the Cheesecake Factory.
There's a big gathering of Scientologists, and Miscavige announces to them that the IRS has officially formally recognized the Church of Scientology as a religion and thus tax exempt. And you see people like on this stage with like flags and like doing a synchronized dance thing. And like, I mean, fireworks are going off and lights, and
it's incredible.
It's a really, it's a highly produced moment. And in the process of then recognizing them as a religion and giving them that classification, they also forgive the $1 billion debt. And so just to think about like, I mean, they do cast it in the documentary as this kind of make or break moment that like this was when the church would live or die. And so this is what happened, and then here's how it lived. So,
well, and I think it's funny to note that like, all right, so in the 80s when they're like suing the IRS all this time, this is the same. If we think about this, like this is the same time that all of the Reagan administration people are going after the Rajneeshis. So it's like you have on the one hand, right, like the federal government going after the dirty hippies and their Indian guru, while like ignoring or stiff arming or just like trying to not be. I mean, they basically are like Miscavige and the Scientologists are basically throwing like a 4-year-old temper tantrum of like, I'm just going to scream until you give me what I want.
But they're very white collar.
Yeah.
In doing it.
Yeah. No, with lawyers.
Yes.
Yeah. No. Yeah. But like, and so it's interesting to put those beside each other and see how.
White collar tantrum.
Yeah. And White Collar Tantrum is the name of my punk band. And to see.
You cover.
Yeah. We cover Three Doors Down songs.
There it was. You took it there.
There it is.
You knew where I was going.
Yes.
Anyway.
But the government. So the government can choose, and these are definitely different wings of the government. But like, it's interesting how the government decides who to give IRS exemptions to and who to send the FBI in. Because a number of times they talk about earlier when there were some cases, and because everyone was members of the church, they ruled it as religious practice, which is I was very intrigued by that. Yes. And then the FBI is like, and we're out, and they're never to be seen from again.
I mean, in that.
Well, until there's a raid, but other than that.
Right. So, yeah, like, so to me, you know, the relationship, and this is such an obvious thing to say, but it just continues warranting being said that the relationship between religion and money and the relationship that people have to that relationship, like how much that bugs people or just is a necessary fact of the operational matter is super contextual, because I don't know, there was a lot of understandable, but there was a lot of work that some of the interviewees were doing to try to explain why this is different from like religions that people don't seem to be bothered by, because lots of religious traditions have really gross entanglements with enormous amounts of capital.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, going all the way back to like, that was part of the Reformation thing in,
100%. So
500 years ago.
And so then that kind of begs the question of why the Church of Scientology is an outlier or anomalous. And so, you see people kind of doing that work. And so we hear from the journalist who says, well, it's about a bait and switch, because if you talk to a Christian or a Buddhist, like in the first few minutes, they'll basically be able to tell you what the, nutshell of their beliefs are.
Yeah.
With Scientology, you think you're going in under one, for one purpose, but then you don't actually hear about the tenets of your like origin story until you're like a few $100,000 in.
Yeah. But that's the Gnosticism I'm talking. Like there are there have been in other parts of the world and other places, even in the West, similarly structured groups that we call religion, like Zen Buddhism, like all sorts of things where you don't get the full thing until later on down the line because you can't handle it right away.
Right.
That's why you're here.
Right. And so where the path to enlightenment starts and stops in relation to the path to monetary success and fiscal solvency is something that I find really interesting.
And it makes me think like the kind of dominant little e evangelical Protestant model of like, here's the truth, we're giving it to you, now pray this prayer you're in, was also motivated by economic and financial ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't want to talk like that's not something we think we go through right away, but like the whole development of that kind of like easy open theology was partially about we are now in a country from the Constitution forward where we don't have state taxes to pay our bills. So we got to get more people in. So let's make it as easy as possible.
And it also lets you literally afford to keep up and running things like segregation academies. Yeah. And so, it still remains so wrapped up in debates about like private and public schooling, federal assistance, and like, I don't know. That was one of the things. The other thing was that big stage. I thought, and you mentioned earlier the kind of performance optics, and that was another thing I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, because
Marty Rathbun at one point calls it Nazi symbolism, and again, like maybe depending on context, because I can think of all sorts of other examples where there's one dude on a giant stage and people are totally chill about it, but the optics are striking.
A Three Doors Down concert.
The optics are striking though. Focus. The optics are striking because there is this giant stage. There is this kind of nationalistic, military imagery. You see people when they're like introducing each other on that stage, when Tom Cruise or whoever comes up, they like salute each other in this really formal,
they have medals,
rigid way. The medals. The people who are the like head honchos in the organization all wear Navy uniforms. Like it's part of this Sea Org kind of vibe, but it doesn't extend only into Sea Org because you also see it with Tom Cruise. So,
well, I'm just sitting here thinking like the only other things I've seen that look like this are like international sports, like if like the World Cup, not the actual World Cup, but like these events where like Sepp Blatter and all of these like European sportocrats get together have this same kind of like vibe to them, which I think is kind of interesting because those are also deeply corrupt and really about money, even though they use the ideology of like sport to hide it.
Well, and okay, how much do people look into it? And I'm sure that like it's easy perhaps for insiders to say that this is maybe just like the media trying to take down their leader or something, but the military record of L. Ron Hubbard
Yeah.
was something that, so like he really was into this like characterization of himself as this war hero. But it seems like his military record is pretty easy to find. I don't know how, like, the people making the film anyway were like, if you read blah 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 blah, like, I don't know how they access that or what the deal is, but it didn't seem like it was, they didn't spend time with like, here's the covert digging that we had to do to like uncover first time seen here. Like, his military record is around. He accidentally shelled an island and got discharged, and he like had some arthritis. But so I think it's interesting that kind of mythology and that characterization continued to live far beyond. I think that's a really interesting piece of the puzzle.
Like Hubbard, to some extent, Jones, like there's these things, definitely T and Doe and Heaven. Like I keep wondering how much the kind of psychoanalysis of founders is helpful or not. Like this like, because I can see the idea that like Hubbard was a failed military leader, and so he invented his own, basically like the paramilitarism of the whole thing, and is how much of that is him working that out, and then it gets, and so that becomes because like the invention of language and the invention of like, there's so many acronyms, there's so many new terms that like, so is that or is that just his science fiction brain? Because like there's easy, you could compare it to Star Trek, you could compare it to any number of other, like, I mean, it a lot of it, the Xenu stuff, like the myth, and on one level, and then also the kind of Scientology structure. It's almost like becoming a citizen in another nation in these ways. They also sound like the kind of the plots to like a very average Xbox game, like, right. And so I don't know. I keep coming back and forth on like how much do we want to read these as just like one man's dream, right, or whatever that's then spun out of control,
right? Versus just the optics and packaging necessary for any institution to sustain itself in a tidy way. I wonder, so then here's another rabbit hole that I did not go down, but in invitation to do so. We're talking about the song We Stand Tall, which was produced in-house by and for the Church of Scientology. And it was kind of this celebratory moment after they were deemed a religion by the IRS.
Yeah.
I wonder how, like, where does that musical moment stand in relation to like the We Are the World?
No, it's definitely,
because that's very,
it's drawing on that.
That's very much the,
we could do an entire
sense of things.
So I pulled it up. There's a YouTube. It's on YouTube, and it's the We Stand Tall Scientology music video. David Miscavige stands short, and L. Ron Hubbard lies. That's the title. But
sure,
we could do
what I'm gonna do, and
we could do an entire episode just about this music video, because it's drawing on everything from We Are the World to I'm getting some serious Moral Majority, Jerry Falwell vibes from some of the stuff.
Do you think it's on Spotify though? Because it would be really funny if that could be like the song that plays in the in the post that comes up when we release this episode. Not that I'm going to. I'm not going to, but it would be interesting.
It's
if that
probably on there. Or Three Doors Down.
You can we should make a cult favorite playlist.
Ooh. Yeah. Talk about a schizophrenic party.
If it includes either of those things, I probably will not be a listener, but I would be glad to have it.
There's a race car. There's David Miscavige driving a race. I'm sorry.
I mean, he's BFF with Tom Cruise, and they're both really into race cars, as I understand it. I'm not really sure. What's your takeaway, Mike? Let's bring this back.
Yeah,
let's bring this back around. Let's take it to let's bring this home.
We talked about how you don't necessarily are interested in defining a cult.
Yeah.
And I'm not really, but I kind of am, in terms of like, what is the lowest common denominator across all the definitions we run into.
Mm.
And so it seems to me, so I'm not trying to like make one up that I think
Sure.
is useful, but it seems to me that like large abusive institution seems to be the word, which would include all sorts of things. But like in here, that you do get a brainwashing reference late in the documentary, and I think it's because I think that's also a way to talk about, like, no one thinks brainwashing is. They used to talk about brainwashing in the 19th century when you had all of these Indian gurus coming over in like the 1880s to like 1920s, and they were often attracting rich widows or rich young daughters of rich families to their lectures and things. And there was this idea that they were like being brainwashed in the sense of like some sort of like Oriental mysticism. So like, it's not that, like, that's not what someone means. They don't think that people are somehow like manipulating their mind in this language that we hear here. It's more like being so engrossed in a kind of social formation that you can't think without, which is why like without those tools, and that's why the language is so important. Like, that's why whether it's Heaven's Gate, which was, you know, not nearly the abuse issues that we have here, or this example like of Scientology, it's about learning to like talk the talk and kind of do
that you're willing to be told what to think. Yeah,
but it's not even that, because you're being willing. You're absorbing the language with which you're going to think, and that's going to shape it. I mean, Susan Harding's book, Book of Jerry Falwell, talks about this in terms of like evangelical Christians.
Well, there we go, because that's what I was just thinking. Like, I mean, as what distinguishes brainwashing from conversion?
Right.
You know,
no,
like,
yeah, is that well, because after my conversion, when I deconverted I look back and it's brainwashing, right? It's like no one's ever says like, please brainwash me.
Nobody's ever brainwashed in the moment. It is like happiness.
I would love to be brainwashed.
Retroactive.
Yeah.
Phenomenon.
Yeah. You don't recognize it in the moment.
Yeah.
And so, I think that it was for me thinking about how like that large institution then means that you get all sorts of like paperwork and bureaucracy, which you've already talked about, like with the Rajneeshis, but like, I mean, it's just, this is a massive, whether it's Hillsong or Osho or here, like the large bureaucratic institutional work that has to happen to then present, to build a social space that people will then come into. And in some ways, it's like you have to have all the same kind of social infrastructure to replace whatever they have previously. And so it's like you're almost building, like, every cult, quote unquote cult, is like kind of like Epcot. Like, it's got everything you need for a society, but it's all like fabricated in a relatively recently. And I think that's, so to me, that was just an interesting kind of way to think about what these things are. Because to me, I don't really care. Like, I don't need to call Scientology a cult to be like, there's a lot of things in it I find deeply problematic.
Sure.
But if we're going to say, if it's a word that's out there, I'd at least like to use it to talk about things that have some form of harm to them that we can sort of recognize. As if that's what we mean, is like, it's a way of, which then means we can open up and talk about,
Yep. Because I don't,
I
don't disagree with you. I just think that then, I mean, this is also, I guess, why academics are no fun at parties, but it's like, well, what really is harm? Because I mean, like, I'm not saying that that's, something that can't be defined. It's just that, like, according to several definitions of abuse and harm that I feel like are probably compelling, like all sorts of traditions, many of which we would call religious, occupy that kind of space. And so it's just it's a kind of like endless system of, I don't know, it's definition all the way down. But that very thing of like, you got to have paperwork to create this machine of an institution that then kind of perpetuates by virtue of its own like income and self-sustenance and whatever, is the thing that then like, so the documentary deals with the machine and the institution. But like you said earlier, we don't hear a lot about how it came to be something that was able to be built into an institution. And that is I do find that interesting. I am curious about it. Like what was happening when the ships of the Sea Org like docked in a place in the Mediterranean, and then they would go like ashore and spread the good news. Like, how did that work? What was the, a book, maybe it does in the 50s, but like a book doesn't just instantly become famous. Like what was the press surrounding it? What was the press surrounding it? What was the, like, I don't know. I do wonder those things, but I also, think that there's something to, not unlike our relationship to the relationship between religion and money. I think there's also a question I have about when we feel like we need to explain how someone could possibly believe this or that.
Yeah.
And when we don't.
Yeah.
Like plenty of religious studies scholars have talked about that. Our own Russell McCutcheon is one of them. But like, I think it's an important point of we only tend to want to explain how someone could possibly be taken in by this set of beliefs when that set of beliefs is something exterior or just like apart from the mainstream or what we like understand as here are the religious systems that even if I think that they're wacky or hokey or totally false, I'm not gonna write an op-ed about how someone could possibly let's explain how whatever. How does someone
I mean, just look at
possibly believe something inside of our like major religions.
Yeah, just track like Catholicism and Mormonism and how they've been understood by the broader kind of public and journalists or whatever from like the 1820s for Catholicism all the way through. And it's like, it went from being like, how could people believe that that's actually Jesus's blood and body in the communion to to like Catholic presidents, right? Like, and so it just became the Overton window of belief is constantly shifting.
There's been time enough.
I think what you get at, if we've kind of said like, is there a cult if there's not a camera pointed at it? Because the role the media plays in all of this is huge, right? Yeah. I think too, like there is the definition of the idea of religion in the Constitution as this thing that it's there's no establishment, but there's also free exercise. If it's religion, you don't have to pay taxes, but you can't be in a public schools theoretically. It is, Winifred Sullivan has written about this. He calls it kind of the specialness of religion. It is a kind of, I don't know if it's a bug or a feature in American sort of political theory that so many of these groups that these documentaries are made about are constantly kind of like hitting on. It's like a cheat code, whether it's Scientology or the Rajneeshis, like all the religious freedom language they use to defend themselves. Sure. Same thing you see that language in Heaven's Gate, even Jonestown, obviously. Yeah. So like, there's a way that like, if we're kind of thinking like, what are the forces that intersect to create these sorts of things? Like, I think you're right. It's like money, but also in terms of that special bug in the system that is religion and religious freedom. And then the media on top of that. And then, who knows, we'll keep adding ingredients, I guess, as we go. Yeah. I mean, it'll become a veritable Cheesecake Factory menu. The Cheesecake Factory menu. That's how I think of religious freedom. That's how I think about the world religions paradigm. Okay. I have a cult favorite. Yeah. What's your cult favorite? I have two, actually. So I don't know if you knew, but Kate Bornstein, who is a trans performer, scholar, activist, artist about town. Kate Bornstein was
a Scientologist for 12 years. And
Okay.
yes, and I brought, you see my little show and tell. I brought my
Yeah.
gender workbook,
Okay.
which was a book that she wrote in the early 90s. It was published in the late 90s, 1998.
Wow.
Yeah, and so there's a new there's a recent, I mean, like, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
She redid it because she needed new language for lots of things, but my gender workbook was really important to me. It was one of the like first primary texts that like actually asked me in a direct way to think about so many things that were already in my head about experience and the way that I understood and lived gender. And so I have a deep fondness for Kate Bornstein. And and so what I'm recommending, I guess, is her recent memoir from 2021 called A Queer and Pleasant Danger.
Okay.
The true story of a nice Jewish boy who joins the Church of Scientology and leaves 12 years later to become the lovely lady she is today. So, Auntie Kate is one of my cult favorites. Her memoir, and she was like pretty high up in the system too. At the time, she was Al Bornstein, and Al was a member of the Sea Org, and like. Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway. Okay, that's one.
That's one.
The other one is it came out in November of last year, and it's Cat Power Sings Dylan, the Royal Albert Hall concert. It's a live album. Cat Power covers like song for song Bob Dylan's set list when he like went electric. And so there's like the first half are all of these acoustic songs. And then, and it's the reason that I bring it up right now is in part because I just went to Birmingham and saw a live performance of it, and it was stunning, so gorgeous. But also in thinking about like long processes over many years wherein a person like is away and then goes through a process, which is very much what I think this documentary is about.
Yeah.
The first and only time I had seen Cat Power until just this past weekend was 22 years ago when she came to Tuscaloosa and sang at the Chucker and like left the stage in tears. And it was very much in that kind of like since much publicized, perhaps over publicized, like phase of stage fright that really kind of characterized her relationship to live performance. And to see her 22 years later covering Bob Dylan and just creating an experience that was so immersive. I loved to see Sean Marshall on the other side of a process that was its own long and hard won thing. So way to go. It's a wonderful album.
Yeah, I'm going to go check this out.
Yeah, you should.
Put away the two doors down.
Well, Cat Power, does tell you a lot about maybe like Miranda Simmons in the early aughts. I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's
I'm looking at the set list. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's great.
What's your cult favorite?
I am future casting my cult favorite. I'm wish casting because I need to find the time to watch this. So I haven't watched it yet. It just, as of this recording, which is probably a couple weeks ago from when you're listening to this, it just dropped on Netflix and I haven't had time to watch it yet. But this is a Mike attempt to take a step towards Miranda's media. I think. Because it's
okay.
not as bad as my usual stuff. So it's called The Queen.
I never called it bad.
It's called The Queen of the Villains. And it's on Netflix. It's 5 episodes. And it is the dramatization of the true life story of Dump Masumoto, who was the greatest bad guy in Japanese women's wrestling history in the 70s and 80s. So in the late 70s into the 80s, there was a promotion called All Japan Wrestling, not to be confused with the current All Japan Wrestling, which is a men's promotion, because in Japan, women's wrestling and men's wrestling are separate promotions. They don't mix them like they do here.
Mm-hmm.
So the story is before Dump Masumoto becomes one of Japan's most reviled pro wrestling villains, she was just a sweet girl who overcame her shyness by watching other women in the ring. The Queen of Villains, a 5-episode series about her rise to infamy, shows her transformation from teenage wallflower Kaoru into the terrifying, bloodthirsty Dump Masumoto. So she was the bad guy who made the Crush Girls was the name of the baby faces, the good guys, who made them like famous. And there's all these other famous Japanese women, and women's wrestling in Japan in the 80s was it was some of the best wrestling period in the world in terms of athleticism, performance, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
And so I'm very excited to watch this because it has a bunch of other like sort of legendary people who are portrayed in it.
So it's a dramatized series.
It's a dramatized series,
okay.
Yeah. And I think it's in Japanese with subtitles too.
And it's already out?
It came out like a couple days ago. So I'm excited to try to get to watch it. And
cool.
I think it's going to if you liked Glow, I think it's going to be even better at a certain level because it's a very cool little understood moment in Japanese history and in sort of pro wrestling history where like at one point like these All Japan shows were like some of the highest rated television in Japan. So
wow,
go check it out. It's like 5 episodes. They're kind of like an hour long. The last one's like really long, but it'll be, and if it's
I like it because it's also, I feel like it does sound interesting to me, but it also is something that like makes me feel like I'm taking a step to your media.
Yeah. The trailer looks amazing. So yeah. And it has I do think there's one American, and Alexa Bliss, Lexi Kaufman is in it. So if you're for wrestling people, but yeah, it's worth it.
Cool.
So cool. All right. Thank you for listening to Cult Favorite. Subscribe to the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Leave us a rating, review. Follow us at Cult Favorite Pod on all the socials. Send us feedback. We've gotten no feedback.
Yes, we have.
Well, okay.
You just don't see it on the like formal channels that you're identifying as feedback. We've had so much feedback, and I really appreciate it, even though it's informal. Everybody,
right. If you send us an email, I'd like for you to copy and paste that into a review. And as always, special thanks to the Department of Religious Studies at the University of Alabama.
You know what?
Yes.
No, keep going. Sorry.
You're interrupting my ad read.
I know. I'm sorry. Go.
How are we ever going to monetize this? If you are interested in pursuing an innovative master's degree that combines social theory and digital tools, look no further than the Religion and Culture Master's Program at the University of Alabama. The program is designed to equip students with sought-after analytical communication and digital skills that can be applied in any number of careers, while rigorous coursework and original research prepare students for prestigious PhD programs as well.
What I was going to say is that I think if someone writes feedback in a channel that you identify as like formal feedback, you should send them a gift card to the Cheesecake Factory.
I can send them. We should make stickers. We should talk about this. We'll send them stickers.
Bye, everybody.
We need stuff. See y'all next week. Oh, next week we are going to watch Holy Hell
on
Peacock. And we'll talk about that then. Bye.